The morning Tessa walked out of Hargrove Capital's lobby with a cardboard box and the remnants of her dignity, it was raining, not a dramatic storm, not the kind of rain that matches a breaking point, just a thin gray drizzle that made her hair stick to her forehead and soaked through her coat before she reached the parking garage. She remembers thinking, of course. Of course, even the weather couldn't be bothered to acknowledge what had just happened. She had given that company 4 years. 4 years of 60-hour weeks, of skipped vacations, of learning to read her husband's moods the way a sailor reads the sky, watching for the signs that told her to stay quiet, to smile differently, to rephrase what she'd just said before he decided it was an insult. 4 years of building the client relations division from a department of 2 into a team of 11. And when the board voted to restructure, when the name on the termination paperwork turned out to be hers and not the man who had underperformed every quarter for 2 years running, she had sat across from Cillian Hargrove in that glass office and understood, finally with a clarity that felt like cold water, that she had never been seen as anything other than his wife who happened to show up to work. She wasn't even his wife anymore. She had just forgotten to update her understanding of herself. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier. Quick, clean, and humiliating in the particular way that quick and clean things are humiliating, like the efficiency of it was proof of how little had existed between them to untangle. Cillian had kept the apartment in River North. Tessa had kept her car, a storage unit full of things she hadn't decided about yet, and a daughter named Opal, who was 3 years old and had no idea that her parents' marriage had been dissolving for most of her short life. Tessa had not cried during the divorce proceedings. She had not cried when she signed the papers, or when she handed her key card back at Hargrove Capital, or when she drove to her sister's house in Evanston and sat in the driveway for 11 minutes without getting out of the car. She cried, eventually, in the bathroom of her sister Blythe's guest room, with the shower running, so that no one would hear her and come knock on the door with kind expressions that she didn't have the energy to receive. She cried until she felt empty and a little stupid, and then she washed her face, looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment, and said, out loud, to no one, "Okay, what now?" What now turned out to be a coffee shop, not immediately. First, it was 8 months of substitute work as a medical records contractor, which paid the bills and required nothing from her emotionally, which was exactly what she needed. It was 18 months of weekend farmers markets, where she sold pastries from Blythe's kitchen and discovered, somewhat accidentally, that she had a gift for it. Not just the baking, but the particular pleasure of watching someone take a first bite of something she'd made and feel their face change. It was 2 years of saving and planning, and one very long conversation with a small business advisor in a strip mall office in Rogers Park, who told her the numbers were tight but workable if she was willing to take the risk. She was willing. The coffee shop was called Foxglove. It was in a narrow storefront in Andersonville with exposed brick and mismatched chairs and a menu that changed with the seasons. Tessa opened it 4 years after the day she'd walked out of Gideon's lobby in the rain, and by the time Opal started kindergarten, Foxglove had a line out the door on Saturday mornings and a wait list for private events. She had built something. She had built it herself, and on the days when she was too tired to feel proud of it, she could at least feel the specific satisfaction of a person who has learned to trust their own hands. She did not expect to see him again, or rather, she had expected it, the way you expect a thing you dread but believe is inevitable, and so she had prepared for it in the quiet, ongoing way people prepare for possibilities they hope will never arrive. She had her answer ready. She knew what she would say, how she would say it, the exact temperature she would maintain in her voice. She had rehearsed it in the shower, in the car, in the narrow space between waking and sleep. What she had not prepared for was seeing him with Opal. It was a Tuesday in October, school pickup, the ordinary kind of afternoon that has no business being the backdrop for the moment your life changes. Tessa was 7 minutes late because the espresso machine had needed descaling and she'd miscalculated. She pulled into the school parking lot and scanned the cluster of parents near the front entrance and found Opal immediately. That red coat was visible from 50 yards. And then her eyes moved, as they always did when she was scanning a crowd, to the adult Opal was standing nearest to. The adult was not Blythe. The adult was a man, tall, dark coat, hands in his pockets, crouched down to Opal's level as though they were in the middle of a conversation. And Opal, who did not talk to strangers, who had once spent 45 minutes refusing to say hello to a perfectly kind neighbor because she hadn't been emotionally ready for that level of commitment. Opal was talking to this man with the relaxed posture of someone who had known him for years. Tessa was out of the car before she'd made any conscious decision to move. Opal. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "Come here, please." Opal looked up. "Mama, this man knows my name. I see that." Tessa reached her daughter's side and put a hand on her shoulder, and then she made herself look at the man properly, and every rehearsed line she'd ever prepared dissolved like salt in water. Cillian Voss looked exactly the same, which was both unfair and somehow entirely predictable. "Tessa," he said, just her name. The way he'd always said it, like it was a complete sentence. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was still steady. She was obscurely proud of herself. "I live 3 blocks from here. I moved back to Chicago 6 months ago." He rose from his crouch to his full height. "I didn't know this was her school. I didn't know you were in Andersonville. That's not an answer to my question. I was walking past when the school let out." She dropped her lunchbox. He held it up, Opal's green lunchbox with the fox on the front, which must have slipped from her backpack when she'd come through the gates. "I picked it up and she recognized it and came over, and He paused. "I recognized her." Tessa looked at Opal. Opal was looking between them with the alert interest of a child who has detected an undercurrent she cannot identify, but finds extremely compelling. "Why does the man know my name?" Opal asked. "Because," Cillian said, before Tessa could speak, "I'm an old friend of your mom's." Old friend. Tessa felt something move through her that she couldn't name cleanly. It wasn't anger, or not only anger. It was the particular ache of a word that fits wrong, that puts a neat label on something that had never been neat at all. "Go get your backpack properly settled," Tessa said to Opal. "I'll be right there." Opal surprisingly obeyed. She trotted back to the cluster of children near the entrance, and Tessa turned back to Cillian, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. "She has your eyes," he said finally. "She does." "And?" He stopped. "Yes," Tessa said, because she could see the question forming and she was tired of waiting for it. "She's yours. She's 4.5 years old. You can do the math." Something moved across his face. Not surprise, not quite. Something more like a man who has been carrying a question for so long that having it answered feels more like impact than relief. "Why didn't you?" "You told me to go," Tessa said, not loudly, not with any of the heat she'd expected to feel saying it after so many years. Just cleanly, like a fact. "You told me that you didn't want to see me again, that whatever we had was a mistake, that you needed me out of your life. You said that, Cillian. You said it very clearly. So I went. I was." He pressed his mouth shut. "Then, I was wrong? Yes, you were." She picked up Opal's lunchbox from where he'd set it on the low wall beside them, and she walked back to her daughter. She didn't sleep well that night. She'd expected that. What she hadn't expected was the call at 7 a.m. the next morning from a number she didn't recognize, and then the voice that came through when she answered. Calm, controlled, female, and deeply unpleasant. "Miss Adair, my name is Renata Cole. I'm an attorney representing Cillian Voss." Tessa sat down very slowly on her kitchen stool. Across the room, Opal was eating cereal and arguing quietly with a stuffed rabbit about something. "I see," Tessa said. "Mr. Voss has reason to believe that he may be the biological father of your daughter, Opal. He's asked me to reach out regarding next steps. Next steps. As though her daughter were a project with deliverables. He's had approximately 16 hours to reach this conclusion," Tessa said. "That's quick, Mr. Voss is a decisive person, I remember." She looked at Opal, who had now recruited the rabbit to eat cereal too. "What does he want?" "He wants to be involved in his daughter's life." A brief pause. "And he wants paternity confirmed." "Of course he does." She was not going to cry. She was absolutely not going to cry on the phone with Renata Cole, attorney, who was doing her job and had probably never met Opal, and had no reason to understand that Opal was not a next step, Opal was a whole person who slept with 3 stuffed animals and was terrified of the drain in the bathtub and could name 14 species of birds by sight. "I'll need to speak with my own attorney before I respond to any formal requests," Tessa said. "Please direct future communications through her." She hung up. Then she sat very still for a moment, and then she said, "Opal, finish your cereal. We're going to be late." "The rabbit is still eating," Opal said. "The rabbit can finish on the bus." She found out 3 weeks later that the attorney had understated things considerably. Cillian Voss was not simply a man with enough money to retain a lawyer. He was, and apparently had been for the past 2 years, the majority owner of Voss and Stratton Holdings, one of the 10 largest private equity firms in the Midwest. She found this out from Blythe, who found it out from a Google search that she had done approximately 30 seconds after Tessa told her what happened, because Blythe was that kind of person. "He's worth," Blythe started. "I know, Tessa, I know. I know what this means." What it meant was that he had resources she didn't, a legal team she couldn't match, and the capacity to make this very, very difficult if he decided to. What it meant was that her careful, quiet, hard-built life had just become significantly more complicated. What it also meant, and this was the part she didn't want to look at directly, was that Opal had a father who was looking for her. And no matter what Tessa felt about Cillian Voss, Opal was allowed to have complicated feelings about that when she was old enough to have them. Tessa believed this. She believed it firmly, even when believing it felt like swallowing something sharp. Her attorney's name was Waverly Church, and she was brilliant and precise, and had the particular quality of making Tessa feel, in meetings, that the situation was survivable. "He's filed for paternity testing," Waverly said. "Standard process. You can agree voluntarily, or we wait for the court order, but either way it's happening." "Agree voluntarily," Tessa said. "I'm not going to make this about obstructing something that's factually true." Waverly made a note. "He's also requesting visitation rights, eventual shared custody, and this is the part I want you to sit with. He wants to introduce himself to Opal." "She doesn't know what a father is," Tessa said. "I mean, she knows the concept. We've talked about it. But she doesn't have one in her day-to-day life. She has me and Blythe's husband and a lot of regulars at my coffee shop who bring her cookies. Introducing a stranger as her dad it's not a thing you can undo once you do it. I understand that. She's 4. I know." Waverly's voice was careful. "But the law is going to give him rights here, Tessa. The question is whether we shape what this looks like, or whether we let it get litigated." Tessa thought about Opal on the playground, the way she'd talked to Cillian with her whole body turned toward him, easy and open, the way she was with animals and people she'd decided to trust before she had any reason to. She thought about what it would mean to let that trust become a tool in a legal proceeding. "Set up a meeting," she said. "Not through lawyers, just the 2 of us." She chose Foxglove because it was her territory, because if she was going to be unsettled, she was going to be unsettled somewhere that smelled like cardamom and roasted coffee and had her name, in a manner of speaking, on the door. Cillian arrived 5 minutes early. She noticed that. He'd always been early. She'd forgotten that about him, or maybe she'd put it away with the other things that were easier not to remember. He sat across from her at the small table near the window. Outside, October had deepened into something colder. The lights inside Foxglove were warm amber, and Tessa thought, very briefly and stupidly, that he looked good in that light. Then she put that thought somewhere appropriate and left it there. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I had a legal team ready." "I know. I've met your legal team." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I'm not interested in fighting you over Opal's life in a courtroom. That's not good for her. No, it's not. So I need you to understand something before we have any other conversation." She met his eyes directly. "Opal comes first. Not your schedule, not your feelings about what you missed, not your attorney's timeline. Her well-being, her comfort level, her pace. If you can agree to that, we can talk." "I agree to that." "Just like that?" "I've had 3 weeks to think about almost nothing else," he said. "Yes, just like that." She studied him. He looked tired, she noticed. Not unhappy, exactly, but like a man who has been running a calculation that doesn't quite balance and has finally stopped pretending it does. Why did you come back to Chicago, she asked. Not because it was relevant. Because she found she needed to know. He looked at the table for a moment. My mother got sick. I came back to help, and then, I don't know. I stayed. The city felt different than it did when I left. Or maybe I was different. You left very suddenly. Last time, I know, and very completely. I know that too. He exhaled. I was afraid of what we were becoming. Which is a terrible reason to do what I did, and I'm not asking you to forgive it. I want you to know that I understood eventually that it was fear, not a decision based on reality. Tessa was quiet for a moment. Outside, a couple walked past with a dog and a stroller. Normal Tuesday afternoon, somebody's whole ordinary life happening 3 feet from the window. What were you afraid of, she asked. That it was real, he said simply. That you were real and I was going to ruin it. Which is, he gave a short, humorless laugh. Which is exactly what I did. By being afraid of doing it. She didn't say anything. She wasn't sure what to say. The thing about being a person who has spent 4 years building something careful and solid is that you become protective of that solidity in ways that are hard to separate from caution and hard to separate from fear. What I want, he said, is to know her. I'm not trying to take her from you. I'm not trying to take anything. She's mine, and I didn't know, and now I know, and I need to figure out how to be someone she can count on. Starting from zero. Starting from zero, Tessa repeated. Yeah. She thought about Opal with the stuffed rabbit, arguing about cereal. She thought about the way Opal had turned toward a stranger in a parking lot and just decided to trust him before she had any information at all. Maybe Opal knew something Tessa was still figuring out how to know. Okay, she said. We start slow. Very slow. You come to the shop on Saturday mornings when she's here helping me. She sees you as a regular customer first. You earn her trust before you tell her anything. Whatever you think is right. This is going to take time. I have time, he said. I'm not going anywhere. He was there the following Saturday at 9:15. He ordered a pour-over and a slice of the maple walnut cake and sat at the same window table. Opal, who spent Saturday mornings at Foxglove doing elaborate pretend transactions with the pastry display case and bossing the part-time barista named Greg into playing along, noticed him with the peripheral awareness of a child who misses nothing. She watched him for about 20 minutes. Then she walked over and stood beside his table. That's the good cake, she announced. Is it? Cillian looked at his plate. How do you know? Because I helped make it. Then I definitely ordered the right thing. Opal pulled out the chair across from him and sat in it without being invited, which was vintage Opal. Do you know the Fox? She asked. What Fox? She pointed to the sign above the door. Foxglove. There was a painted fox curled in the letter O. My mama named the shop after a flower, Opal explained, with the tone of someone correcting a common misconception. But the flower is named after foxes. Foxes and gloves, she told me. I didn't know that, Cillian said. Opal regarded him seriously. Most people don't. From behind the counter, Tessa watched. She had both hands flat on the counter, and her throat felt tight in a way she didn't entirely understand. It wasn't grief, and it wasn't joy, and it was something that partook of both. She had been so careful. For 4 years she had been so careful, building the walls in just the right places, keeping Opal safe and herself together, and the whole careful structure of their life intact. And now here was a man she had loved, sitting across from her daughter who had her own mother's eyes, and her father's way of sitting very still when he was paying full attention to something. She could see it even from here, the particular quality of his stillness, and Opal was explaining the etymology of the shop name to him with complete confidence that he would find it as interesting as she did, which he clearly did. He was leaning forward slightly. He had put down his fork. Okay, Tessa thought, not to anyone in particular, just to herself, to the future, to whatever came next, okay? The conversation that changed everything happened 6 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon, in the small back office of Foxglove, where Tessa did the books and kept an emergency supply of chocolate and a framed photo of Opal at age 2 eating an entire cupcake with her whole face. Opal had gone home with Blythe for the afternoon. It was quiet in the shop. The closing barista was handling the last hour out front. Cillian had stayed after his usual Saturday visit, and Tessa hadn't asked him to leave, and they'd ended up here, which was either a significant development or just a Sunday. She asked me last week. Tessa said, "Where Dad's come from?" Cillian went still. She's been asking questions. She has a friend at school, Polly, who talks about her dad a lot. Opal noticed the pattern. Tessa looked at her hands. She asked me if she had one somewhere. What did you tell her? That she did. That he didn't know about her when she was born, but that he was learning, and that maybe she stopped. Maybe someday she'd get to know him. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. "She's going to know who I am eventually," Cillian said. "Yes? And are you ready for that?" Tessa considered this for a long moment. Ready was the wrong word. She wasn't sure ready existed for a thing like this. What she had instead was the hard-won knowledge of what she was capable of surviving, and the understanding that Opal's good was separate from her own feelings about the man who was Opal's father, and the recognition that those two things could coexist without one canceling the other. "I'm not going to pretend this is easy," she said. "What you did 4 years ago, walking away, the way you did it, no explanation, no room to talk. I carried that for a long time. I'm still carrying parts of it, I know. But she's ours." The word surprised her when she said it. She hadn't planned to say it. She's ours, and she deserves to know that. All of it. The whole complicated truth of where she came from. Cillian looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were the same as she remembered. Everything was the same as she remembered, which was something she was still deciding what to do with. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I don't think I've earned that." "No, not yet. Not yet," he repeated, like he was testing how that landed. And something in his face changed, very slightly. Not hope, exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that had not been sure it was allowed to exist and had just been told it could, maybe, try. "One thing at a time," Tessa said. She stood and gathered the papers she'd been pretending to work on, and she turned off the lamp on the desk, and the room went amber and dim with the last of the afternoon light coming through the single small window. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago does in December, full dark by 4:30, the streets full of coats and breath clouds and the particular purposeful energy of a city that refuses to slow down for weather. Tessa had come back to this city with nothing but a cardboard box and her daughter and the absolute necessity of starting over. And she had built something here, something real, and it was hers in a way that nothing had ever been hers before. She was not going to let anyone take that. Not the fear, not the past, not the cautious voice in the back of her head that still sometimes sounded like a woman standing in a parking garage in the rain asking, "What now?" "What now?" she had answered 4 years ago and every day since. This, and then the next thing, and then the thing after that. She pulled on her coat. "Come on," she said to Cillian Voss. "I'll buy you a coffee before we close." He stood, and they walked out of the back office and into the warm light of the shop together. And from the window, a stranger looking in would have seen two people, careful, uncertain, beginning, and a wall behind them covered in photographs of the place a woman had built from nothing, and a sign on the door that told you exactly what a foxglove was named for, if you knew to look.